School, a daily part of the majority of our lives, a game we all have to play. Some people have had starts, some can pay to win, and some are just luckier than others. But at the end of the day, it's a game where some lose and some win. I've spent 15 of the 19 years of my life in the school system, and the last 5 years studying and sitting various formal exams, GCSEs, AS levels, A levels, and university exams. And over this time, I've learnt the tips and tricks which have helped improve my ability and capability to win the school game. And in this video, I'm going to share them with you. Before we dive into the main substance of this video, it's first important to note the pre-game advantages that do exist. Things such as the type of school you attend, as well as things like the quality of teaching available to you, the geographical location of your school, the amount of funds you have available for you for additional resources such as tutors, and of course, one's natural academic ability. The vast majority of these pre-game advantages which I'm talking about are exogenously given. What I mean by this is we can't really change them, but rather each individual just takes them as given. Thus, it's important to contextualize what we're talking about when we refer to winning the school game, as two different people's relative wins could look very different. But now we've got that very important caveat out of the way, we can go on to talk about what the optimal strategy is, i.e. what's the best thing we can do, the best way to play this school game to best improve our chances of winning. And what I've done is I've thought of, in my opinion, the three biggest things. And those are using lessons for learning, focusing on weaknesses, and being consistent and disciplined. So let's start off by talking about what I mean when I say let's use lessons for learning. Now, like the pre-game advantages I've discussed, we can view lessons as something which is pretty much fixed. And this is because usually they're compulsory. And thus, given the fact we don't really have a choice on whether or not we attend, given we must attend, we may as well try and get the most from these lessons as possible. A lot of students fall into the trap of believing success in the school game solely depends on what work is done outside of the classroom. Those late night revision sessions, those past papers at your desk at home, etc. However, utilising lesson time effectively is just as important. But in practice, what does utilising lesson time effectively really look like? Well, the first thing it looks like is being actively engaged. When you're in those lessons, try and really think about what the teacher is saying and make a really active effort to engage in the content of the lesson. This simple mindset shift can really affect how much you get from a given lesson. In an ideal world, you should be walking out of every lesson knowing more than when you walked in. A simple way to really see the importance of lessons is just imagine two students. One who actively engages in all their lessons and the other who doesn't pay attention at all. Even without considering the time spent studying outside of the classroom, the student who is actively engaging is already hours ahead of the other student each week. And now, the second thing for this optimal strategy, which is focus on your weaknesses. It's not just the amount of time we spend on our studies which determines how well we succeed and how likely we are to win the school game, it's also what we do with that time studying. Spending your time studying, focusing on your weaknesses, i.e. either focusing on your weakest subjects or focusing on the weakest topics within each subject, is really how you utilise your time studying and revising the best. Now, I know you might be sitting there thinking, well, why is it beneficial to focus on my weaknesses? To give a very technical answer, it's because we can view knowledge acquisition as this concave function. So the weaker you are at a subject or topic, the more additional knowledge you'd get from an additional hour or day studying that subject. An easy way to prove this is as follows. So imagine a subject you're best at, maybe it's maths, physics, English, etc. If you spent an additional hour studying that subject, the amount you'd increase your knowledge of that subject would be quite small. Now take a subject you've never even studied before, and it could be something completely random. If you spend an hour studying that subject, you'd gain so much more because your base, what you're starting from, is so much less. And the same logic applies to justify why you should focus on your weaknesses. During my GCSEs, I barely revised for maths. And this is because I was already naturally quite good at maths, so an additional hour or an additional day revising it would have had very little impact on the actual mark I would have achieved in my exam. Instead, I spent more time revising subjects such as history and sociology, as an additional hour or an additional day on these subjects would have a much more substantial impact on my marks, my knowledge, and hopefully my grades. And then the third and final thing I want to talk about in this optimal strategy section is being disciplined and being consistent. It may be cliche, but consistency really is key. But remaining disciplined and consistent is something which is much easier said than done. So what I'll do is I'll give you some practical tips of how to remain consistent and disciplined throughout your time studying and revising. I think the best and most convincing point to make here is something which Ali Abdaal talks about a lot, which is the fact that it's very easy to remain consistent and disciplined when you're doing something you enjoy.
When was the last time you felt you needed discipline to, I don't know, watch Netflix? We tend not to need discipline for those things because those things are inherently enjoyable. The things we need discipline for are the things that we don't enjoy. So you only need discipline to go to the gym if you don't enjoy going to the gym. You only need discipline to study for your exams if you do not enjoy the process of studying for your exams.
And thus, by using this logic, the easiest way to remain disciplined and consistent with your studying is by making it fun. For instance, have a tracker for flashcards or past exam papers. Study with your friends. Choose a nice environment to do your studying. All these things make the process of studying much more fun, and thus you're much more likely to remain disciplined and consistent throughout. So now we've talked about the main components of an optimal strategy when playing the school game. Let's talk about practicing the game before you jump in the deep end. Now, just like anything else, you wouldn't do the big final event without practicing beforehand. For instance, no runner just turns up at the marathon without doing any practice beforehand. And you can view school and exams in the exact same way. I.e., it doesn't make any sense to show up to your exams without doing any practice and preparation beforehand. And the best way to practice and prepare for exams is, well, by doing past exams. Quite simply, these are most like the real thing, and thus will best prepare you for the real thing. But I understand that doing full exam papers in timed conditions, in examined conditions, straight away can be quite daunting and stressful. But just like a runner training for the marathon, you don't have to do the actual thing straight away. For instance, if you're going to start running, you don't just do a marathon off the bat. So maybe instead of starting with actual full exam papers in actual timed conditions, start with a few questions. Give yourself a bit more additional time, be a bit more lenient with the planning process, etc. to ease your way into it and hopefully finally build up to doing full exam papers in timed conditions to prepare you for the actual thing. Now, some students may not be convinced about doing past exam papers. They may believe that doing flashcards and doing things like active recall is enough in and of itself. However, I'm going to tell you why just solely doing things like flashcards isn't enough. By doing past and practice exam papers, you can really familiarise yourself with what the actual exams are going to look like. E.g., the way they phrase questions, what exactly they're looking for, keywords they're looking for in their answers, etc. Also, by doing exam papers, it really lets you know where your weaknesses are in a particular subject or topic. And this is because you can simply look at the questions which you get the fewest marks on. What's more, by doing past exam papers, it should make you way more relaxed and comfortable going into the actual exam, as it's not a novel thing. You've done this many times before. Then the final thing to note about this whole video of the school game is that it doesn't have to be player v player. When revising, it can sometimes feel like a very lonely and solitary activity, but it doesn't have to be. I'd actively encourage you to form a study group and study with friends and people from your classes. This can really help with motivation and staying consistent. But also, it helps provide a space for you to ask questions about things which don't make sense to you, and also provides you the chance to explain things and test your own knowledge when things don't make sense to other people. And that's all I think I have to talk about when referring to this school game. Hopefully the advice and tips I've outlined in this video puts you in the best place possible to succeed in the school game. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or queries, please feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll see you soon.